All right. So tonight's topic is about guilt, Jewish guilt, right? All the great jokes in I think Jackie Mason has quite a few great Jewish guilt jokes. It's all about Jewish guilt and how Jews always feel guilty. But it's interesting because when you think about Jewish guilt, people talk about Jewish guilt, and they say that the guilt is what causes the guilt. So sometimes everything is all mixed up. But what I wanted today to talk about is it's actually not a major topic, but it's two primary topics that I want to discuss is where does Judaism hold with regard to guilt? Should we be feeling guilty? Is it a healthy feeling from a Jewish perspective? And how does it contrast itself with shame? Should we at times feel ashamed or encourage shame? Or should we be approaching an approach that doesn't support either of those and says that neither shame nor guilt is healthy? So that's our main discussion that we're going to have tonight. So I thought I would discuss something that probably this whole topic, the truth is, the person that I saw that talks quite a lot about it is the previous chief rabbi, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of England, Great Britain. It's one of the topics that I've noticed in his writing has repeated itself numerous times, and he brings it up quite often. He tells he had a writing that I did a quick search because I've noticed this topic in his writing a lot in the past. When I read his articles, his Shabbos Devar Torahs, he still actually has them coming out. Interestingly enough, he has them coming out. I think he pre-wrote like 2 years worth of Devar Torahs. That takes something. 2 years worth of Devar Torahs, and it's all good, high quality stuff. So what he would do is he would just update it every once in a while. Hello, Sam. Hello. How are you?
Are you talking to me? Are you talking to me?
Yes, I was just saying hello. We have a quiet night.
Sorry, my audio wasn't on, and I thought I'm just like a movie. Are you talking to me? I like
Miro.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing that I can't get hit through the computer. You can't hit me, but you can still hit me. There's a hit button.
No, I just don't. It's the last things I will plan to do. I want to do.
Good. Okay, so the topic that we're discussing is guilt, shame, or neither. What's the Jewish approach? So the previous chief rabbi of England in numerous articles brings up this topic, Lord Jonathan Sacks.
Oh.
And in the one article that I saw, he brings a story of a girl, or sorry, a lady that I'll show you the story here for a moment. I'll share my screen. So this is from his website. Now, the story is, he tells the story about in December 2013, there was a young woman named Justine Sacco. She's waiting at Heathrow Airport, and before boarding the flight to Africa, to while away the time, she sent a tweet in a questionable taste about the hazards of catching AIDS. There was no immediate response, and she boarded the plane unaware of the storm that was about to break. 11 hours later, upon landing, she discovered that she'd become an international cause célèbre. Her tweet and responses to it had gone viral. Over the next 11 days, she would be Googled more than 1 million times. She was branded a racist and dismissed from her job. Overnight, she had become a pariah. What's a pariah now?
Unwanted person, somebody undesirable to be around.
Hey, Leon.
Outcast.
Good evening.
Outcast. Hey, Leon.
So she'd become an outcast overnight. You could just imagine. This is this where all she does is she sends an innocent tweet. So obviously what this shows us is at the one hand, it's how careful we have to be with our words, especially on social media, on excuse me, on Twitter and all the like. And how careful you have to be about being canceled. It also tells us that the cancel culture didn't start in 2020. It started in 2013. There was already quite a big, strong cancel culture. But the other thing that we're seeing about social media and the era that we live in is the concept of public shaming. How people go on and say something, or people don't like something that somebody's done, and then people will go on social media and blast pictures and write things about people, and for the whole world to see. And then you could have people that don't even know the person, that all they know about the person is what somebody else wrote about them, or a picture that somebody else posted them, and they feel like they have the right to go and shame that person and comment on that person's life, and lives are literally destroyed overnight. I know people that this has happened to. Now, there's an argument within the ethical world whether this public shaming is a good thing or a bad thing, right? We know that, of course, good things have come from it. It's like if you were to talk about the Me Too movement, that's more or less one of these social media things that people felt that they could go name and shame type of people that had done inappropriate things. Some had done more than just inappropriate, had done serious bad acts. Others had done just inappropriate acts. And as a result, they felt that they had the right to publicly call these people out and get them shamed, embarrassed, arrested, or lose their job, things like that. And half the time, sometimes it's people doing something really wrong, like the Me Too movement, where people literally had many of those people that were accused had done really damaging stuff. But sometimes it was just people disagreeing with another person's opinion. And therefore, people felt like they have the right now to call people racist or anti-Semite or whatever it is, some type of supremacist, some type of elitist, something that would just call these people out, and just because of a few words that people say. So is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? So we'll talk about, first of all, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? This is an ongoing debate within the secular world, right? Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. Some say, well, it holds people to be accountable. People are now accountable. You can't get away with just going and abusing somebody without being called out. People will know that they could post about it online. People are being more careful with the way they behave. So on that sense, you would say they're correct, that is a valid point. On the other hand, you're having things like people saying, but then you get people that are not, it's not a court of law. Social media, it's not as though people are coming and bringing evidence and proving, like the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp case that I never watched much myself, but I was still informed quite a bit about it by others. That's a case where, while I don't know if it was the right thing to put on social media, but at least people got to see the actual testimony. They actually got to see the witnesses and hear both sides of the story. They got to see back and forth, instead of somebody just writing something, making up an accusation about somebody else, with the person having no possibility or no way of defending themselves. There's a personal reason why this has particularly disturbed me. Somebody connected to me that was really harmed as a result of somebody making up lies and people that about a particular individual, a leader within the community, that didn't even have a way to defend themselves. So this is common practice, and this is a big problem. And I think that it's just certainly something that we should be very careful to be part of. We shouldn't run to jump on the gun when we see somebody that's been accused of having done something wrong and saying, "Oh, that's right, you can't do that," even if we disagree with the act. But to start chirping in when you don't know the facts, you don't know what actually happened, and you weren't witness, or you haven't seen the witnesses. It's one thing if you've seen witnesses, or you've seen video, and if you get the full story. This is a big problem, and it's just wrong, and it certainly has no basis within Torah and Judaism, that type of behavior. So yes, there's a concept of accountability and people being more aware of how they behave, but to just go and to join in some type of online mob of curses and things and calling people names, whether you like the person or not, it's interesting how usually we join the team of people that against the people that we oppose, and that's about what they do. I think that's a problem as well. So anyway, I'm not a big social media, so it's easy for me to speak. Those that are active on social media and feel like they're defending important causes may have a different opinion, but I certainly don't believe that anybody has the right to make a comment on somebody's life unless they really know. The fact is that Torah holds of alta dinas chavercha ad tgelim komai. I can't make a comment about somebody else unless I've reached their place. It's actually mentioned in different ways numerous times throughout the Torah, and specifically within Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers. We can't start commenting and giving rulership and giving our opinion about somebody else, about what somebody else claims that somebody else did, unless we actually know the facts, right? And causing somebody else to lose their job because of what other people have said. So that's the one.
Excuse me, can you repeat this, what Torah said?
So Torah says, Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers says, Al tadines chavercha ad shetagia limkomai. Do not judge a fellow until you have reached his place, which is in English the statement of do not judge a fellow until you have walked in his shoes, or something like that. But there's another one is a statement also from Pirkei Avos, don lechaf schus, that you have to judge on the side of merit. And that's our obligation as Jewish people, that generally we have to judge the side of merit before we know the facts. Once you know the facts, then you still have to judge the person innocently until we know for certain. In other words, a person could be guilty. If you're in a position of a judge and you're actually adjudicating in an actual court of law from a Jewish perspective, then you're obligated to get the facts properly. And then it's not about judging meritoriously, then it's about seeing the facts and seeing who's right in this particular judgment. But when we're talking about just the way people are talking on the streets and hearsay and things being said, then we have no right to pass judgment on somebody without giving them the benefit of the doubt first. And the second point is fully understanding them. And that's an important point. The truth is that we have no right to really judge anybody. Thanks, Noah. There's also the other one is Dan Chavskos is in Perek Aleph. But yeah, thank you. I'll show you. Noah just posted on the thing. You know what? I'll share it because it's good to see it inside. So, oops, sorry, my apologies. 1 second. Give me 1 second. Rabbi Gamliel. So this is the statement of Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Okay, he says numerous things, but then he would say,
Yeah, this is it. This is it. End of third line from the bottom.
yeah,
Cool.
Alta din escavercha. Oops, sorry. He would say, do not judge your fellow man until you have reached his place. Okay. That's the one source. The other source is in the first chapter, when it says that you're not allowed to judge somebody unless you know. You should always judge meritoriously, judge people favorably. That's the other source. Now, I don't know if we ever lived in a time when this was more relevant, because in our times, this is so prevalent with people just making judgment about people online, etc. So this has become a really important subject for people to talk about. Now, this is not exact topic that I want to get into. This is an introduction to the main topic. The main thing I wanted to talk to you about is contrasting shame with guilt from a Jewish perspective. So, as I mentioned, the one that I saw mainly bring attention to this idea is the chief rabbi, previous chief rabbi Lord Sachs. And I'll show you another article of his where he puts it down beautifully. Give me a second. Okay. So over here he's talking about what does Judaism say about shame. We know that on Yom Kippur there's an interesting ritual that we do. There's the Chazan's repetition for the Musaf prayer on Yom Kippur is extremely long and drawn out. But one of the things that we talk about, one of the reasons why it's so long, is because we're actually talking about the process that the high priest would go through in order to get atonement for the Jewish people. And the service in the temple required that they would do this interesting lottery. And the lottery would have two pieces of paper. The one paper would say La Hashem, and the other one would say La Azazel. One would say to Hashem and the other to Azazel. Basically, what happened is the one that said, and he would take the two pieces of paper and he would put it on the head of two goats. And the one that said La Hashem, that goat would be put aside and taken later on and brought as a sacrifice. That means to God. The other one was La Azazel. Now, there's different interpretations of what the word La Azazel, but what was actually done with this, it was taken, that goat was taken, there was a red ribbon tied around the goat of this goat. And after they did the service, I think the ribbon, if they ever was successful, miraculously, the red ribbon would tie, it would become white. And the Kohen Gadol would confess the sins of the Jewish people on this goat, and then it would be taken by one of the Kohanim, and it was taken outside the walled city of Jerusalem, and there would be a rocky hill that would throw the animal down the hill, and it would die, and it was, so to speak, as though the Jewish people were giving part of this concept of their sins and their shame over to this goat. Now, he asked an interesting question, Rabbi Sachs. Where does this concept of shame come from? There was an anthropologist by the name of, apologies, I scrolled down, Ruth Benedict. So he says like this: we owe to anthropologists like Ruth Benedict, sorry, I'm just trying to zoom in, the distinction between shame cultures and guilt cultures. Shame is a social phenomenon. It is what we feel when our wrongdoings is exposed to others. It may even be something we feel when we merely imagine other people knowing or seeing what we have done. Shame is the feeling of being found out, and our first instinct is to hide. That is what Adam and Eve did in the Garden of Eden after they had eaten from the forbidden tree. They were ashamed of their nakedness and they hid. Okay, so that shame is about this fear of being found out. Now, if you've watched ancient movies or read books about ancient Greek times and things like that, what was like the worst punishment a person could be given is to be walked through public square, and people would throw things at them and shout names and things like that. And that was like the ultimate shame, the ultimate punishment that a person can suffer. In Judaism, that was not common. There was a place for that, but it's all about the public, what the public thinks about me, the public feeling. But he brings that there's other cultures that they focus on guilt, and guilt is a personal phenomenon. So it's a social phenomenon versus a personal phenomenon. It has nothing to do with what others might say if they knew what we have done, and everything to do with what we say to ourselves. Guilt is the voice of conscience, and it is inescapable. You may be able to avoid shame by hiding or not being found out, but you cannot avoid guilt. Guilt is self-knowledge. Okay, so this is the difference. Shame is what other people make you feel, or the fear of what other people will think about you. Guilt is what you think about yourself, despite or not worried, not because of what other people think about you. It's an inherent knowledge of something being wrong, and therefore you feel guilty about it. It's not about the fear of other people finding out. It's about who you are. Is that okay? Clear? That's the difference of what we're talking about when we talk about shame and guilt. Okay. So there's another, so the truth is, which one is Judaism? A guilt or a shame type of society? So there's another difference which explains why Judaism is overwhelmingly a guilt rather than shame culture. Shame attaches to the person, guilt attaches to the act. So here's the main thing. It is almost impossible to remove shame once you have been publicly disgraced. It is like an indelible stain on your skin. Shakespeare has Lady Macbeth say after a crime, will these hands ne'er be clean? In shame cultures, wrongdoers tend either to go into exile when no one knows their past, or to commit suicide. Playwrights have them die. Okay, so what's the point of all this? The point of all this is that which of these approaches is going to be the guilt approach or the shame approach is the more Jewish approach? Okay, so hopefully you've figured out by now that shame, the general shame approach, is not a Jewish approach. But the question is whether the guilt approach is. And the truth is that guilt approach is, it certainly is, and predominantly it's a guilt approach. But the truth is that there is space within Judaism for guilt, for shame, and for at times to have neither, right? But predominantly guilt. So let's talk about why guilt. Why do you think guilt as opposed to shame? Why do you think Judaism is more pro, excuse me, more pro guilt as opposed to shame from what we've just read? Anybody want to say something or add something to that question? Try to answer? No? Okay. Okay, so here's what I want to say. The culture of shame, it's, for example, like, I'll tell you, cultures like Greek culture and possibly Roman culture, Japanese culture, the where this was discovered to be in the strongest format within like recent history was in Japanese culture. Japanese culture, if a person had messed up, then they were like, there was no value to life anymore. We know that one of the reasons why the Japanese fought for so long at the end of the Second World War, even though they were so destroyed and they had like nothing left, and eventually America drops those two crazy bombs in order to force them into ending the war, because they were fighting an endless war. It's because they know, and we know now, looking back at the records and the history of those Japanese generals, that they couldn't take defeat, because defeat meant shame, and shame meant no point in life anymore. They lived for the glory, for the pride, and if they were to lose, then they had no value to their life. That was it, and that's why people in cultures like that are very willing to sacrifice their lives for the sake of shame, or to avoid shame, or because of shame, to commit suicide and things like that. They would rather die than live in a shameful state. But it's interesting, Judaism acknowledges this concept, as in shame being sometimes so severe that a person would rather die. It says in the Talmud that one of the worst averos a person can do, one of the worst sins that a person can do, is to embarrass somebody in public. Why? Why is it so important, damaging? Oh, that was quick. Why is it so why is it so damaging to embarrass somebody in public? I'll show you. Thank you, Noach, for sharing that. That was really quick. The mitzvah says like this: do not bear sin because of him. How do we explain this mitzvah? It is forbidden to shame or embarrass one another. We derive this from this: you should certainly rebuke your neighbor, and do not bear sin because of him. So the pasuk says, you shall rebuke, but you also cannot bear sin. Even when we rebuke the fellow for the sin he has done, which itself is a Torah command, we must be careful not to embarrass the individual, lest we bear sin because of him. I've dedicated another shir to this topic in the past, about embarrassment and rebuking and things like that, right? But what's the point? The point is that we can't allow somebody else under any circumstance, almost any circumstances, to feel shame, even when somebody's doing something wrong. Here you're talking about somebody that did something wrong, and the Torah says you have an obligation to rebuke the person, to tell the person off. It cannot be done in a way that's going to embarrass them. At the same time that the Torah tells you to tell the person off, it's your obligation. When you see somebody do something wrong, tell them that they're not doing the right thing. Help them out. Don't do it in a way that's going to embarrass them, because you know what happens when you embarrass them? Nothing other than they're embarrassed. It makes it much worse.
You come back from it.
Sorry?
You can't bounce back from it. People lose their lives for it.
That's right. Shame is the worst. So there's a few points about shame and how horrific shame is from a Jewish perspective. The number one is, the Talmud says that somebody that embarrasses another person, it's like you're spilling their blood. You know, it says a person becomes red in the face, right? When you embarrass somebody in public, they go red. Why? Because they're losing the sense of themselves. It's blushing. But we're saying it's like you've actually killed them. There's actually sometimes shame could be so damaging to a person, says the Talmud, that people lose a will to live. They just, when they say you want to bury themselves over there because they're so embarrassed. That's why we have to be so careful about never publicly telling people off. And that applies to our children and to young people, and especially them that haven't built up a self-confidence and a self-understanding that adults could be wrong and could do the wrong thing. Of course, to to adults, but we think that for some reason some people think it's okay to embarrass children. That couldn't be further from the truth, and it's probably worse to embarrass children than it is to embarrass adults, even if we have to tell them off, because that will have a lasting impression on them. That will totally change the way they look at themselves and ruin their self-worth by telling them off, by publicly embarrassing them. We have to tell them off. It should always be done in a private way, in a way that's not going to embarrass them publicly. So the same is with anybody else. And it tells us, the Talmud says, if you embarrass somebody, it's so bad that it's almost as though you killed them. That's how bad embarrassment is, shaming. So the other point is that when we try to shame a person, what are we achieving by shaming them? We're trying to say to somebody, and this is why I think it's not only is it just wrong because of the damage, but it's wrong because it's so not true. Shame says to a person, you did this thing wrong, therefore you are damaged, you are bad, you are evil. That's the underlying message of shame, that a person that does something wrong is ultimately evil. That's fundamentally anti-Jewish, as in antithetical to Jewish belief. Because fundamental to Jewish belief is that a person can do something wrong because he's a person, because he's a human being, but that doesn't make him bad. The difference is we can do bad acts, but we doesn't make us bad people. This is really important. I can't emphasize how important this is. When we start saying and starting thinking about ourselves, when you hear people saying about themselves, oh, I did this, I'm a bad person, that means that person has been influenced by a shame culture. And a culture where if somebody does something wrong, somebody disagrees with our opinion, somebody says something that's slightly racist or slightly this, and suddenly they become damaged person, that they now have to be ostracized and removed because they're damaged. What you're ultimately saying, and the terrible destruction in those words is, you are bad because of something that you did, which is, it's not only antithetical to Judaism, it's not true. We know so many people that have done things, yes, that are not good. And some people have done worse things, but have also done great things. You know, one of the worst kings in Jewish history was a man by the name of Herod. Herod, he was an evil man that killed thousands of people, including hundreds of rabbis. Yet he also did lots of good. He rebuilt the temple, and he rebuilt lots of other great structures in the land of Israel that are standing there till this very day. Does that mean that we don't acknowledge the evil that he did? We do. And the evil that he did is much worse than the good that he did in Herod's case. Herod wasn't even a Jew. But the fact is, we have to be able to look at the two acts separately. And despite the fact that he did so much bad, we could also say, yes, the bad is bad, and that has to be rectified. But the good is also good. And people have the ability. We are, as you see at the beginning of the tree of knowledge, what happens to us? We have the ability to do, the tree of knowledge is called the tree of good and bad. We inherently have good and bad inside of us. We have the ability to do good and the ability to do bad. This is why it's so important. So guilt is the opposite. Guilt says the act is a bad act. Yeah, that person did something bad. I did something bad. I can acknowledge that. So that's healthy, because when I do something that's wrong, I feel wrong because I know that that's not the right thing to do. Inherently, it's not right. Or from the Torah's perspective, it's not right. But it doesn't make me bad. And why this is so important is because if, God forbid, I do something wrong that I shouldn't have been doing, if I think of myself in shame ways, I'll start saying I'm bad and I stop believing in myself. And what that ultimately does is leads to more bad. Why does it lead to more bad? Because when a person tells themselves or is told by others that they're bad, they start to believe it. They start saying, well, I did this bad act, therefore I must do bad, and therefore all I can do is bad. And what does that do? It perpetuates evil. It causes people to do more evil. It brings more evil to the world. On the other hand, if I was to say to the person, you did this act, that act itself is not a good act, it's a bad act, or even an evil act at times. But you are still inherently a good person. You are above that. You're better than that. What I'm telling the person is that's not who they are. They're much greater than that. And that's why it's so important not to be bogged down and brought down by what other people say.
But I've got a question. If you saying, as you said earlier, even you person done evil things, you're saying, yes, you're a good person, but you killed somebody. Look, I'm exaggerating, of course, but is it sort of a, like we give it some kind of approval of this act, not maybe direct approval, but we sort of tolerate his act, or he slandered the person, and we say, look, you shouldn't do it, but we sort of tolerate these things. We're not saying, look, it's a wrong things. How we can sort of distinguish, or how we can play it, just these things.
It's a good
it's
question.
Like a sharp edge. It's like a sharp edge. Which side do we are?
Yeah.
Can I try with this one? Can I try and answer that?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So excellent question, Sam. So if I killed somebody, I did a bad act. I did something terrible that's probably inexcusable. But at the same time, there could be people in my life that I'd give my soul to. I could be the best brother or the best sister or the best son or the best, whatever you might want to, whatever. You can do brilliant things for the community, and then you go and you kill somebody. So it's not about whether I'm good or bad. It's about me doing something really bad and not excusing it, not saying that I'm a good person or a bad person, because it depends on who you ask. You might get two opinions, depending on what I've done for other people. But I think that it's in a way not to bury someone for life, in a way to give somebody an opportunity to better themselves, and not to brand them as so and so for life.
I understood what you're saying, and I understood the concept what Rebbe said earlier. But my concern here is, by doing like this, you in a way approving what he do, because look, you know what, oh well, it's just a temporary madness, but you took somebody's life. I'm sorry to use words, the person took somebody's life, and it's sort of a really serious thing. So, or you slander. Sometimes, as we talk with the story with a soccer girl, she become a pariah, become a nothing. After that, really sort of after nothing, she become nothing for other people. And that's sort of a really where's the line to separate one from another.
Yeah. Okay, so the truth is you're right, in the sense that I hear what Noach and I agree with what Noach said. But I think you also bring a valid point. So Judaism does have a concept of certain acts demand a very harsh repercussion. So within Judaism, you have a concept of a death penalty, right? Judaism does have the death penalty when somebody does something like murder. If somebody goes and kills somebody else and there's witnesses, we do. If somebody purposely went and killed somebody and there was witnesses, there is a death penalty according to Judaism. Well, will we actually act on it is a different discussion, right? So what we're saying is that, yeah, no, we're not, and the Torah doesn't say that that person's evil. It says that he's a rasha, or that the act that he's done is evil. But the only way for that person to be atoned is with a severe punishment, because also we need to tell the world that that's not okay, like you're saying. We have to make sure that we don't give the wrong message to the world that such an act is okay. So therefore, within Yiddishkeit, we have that approach where the more severe the act, the worse the punishment is going to be, in order to give the message to people, this act is not okay, that's wrong. And that's why we do it. But it doesn't change the fact is, there's another story where there were a bunch of people that were thieves, and they were stealing and doing terrible things. I don't know if they're doing worse than that, acts. And there was a certain rabbi that was davening that these people should cease to exist and stop bothering the Jewish community and making trouble. I think it was Rabbi Meir. And I believe his wife, who was Beruria, another great, she herself was a scholar in her own right, she says, it says that what should be annulled is the sins, not the sinners. So on the one hand, you want to express that the sin is what's the evil act. But sometimes the sin has to be rectified. In certain cases, the only rectification you're going to have for that sin will be a death penalty. Or if you can't give the death penalty, another extreme punishment. So we do believe in consequences and capital punishment. And in Judaism, we're not really so into jail. Jail is not really mentioned within the Torah except for a very odd occasion. But there is a concept within Talmud of sending people to jail that you can't punish. But according to the Torah, the way you punish a person is you punish them for the act and then they go on. Sometimes the punishment is a death penalty. Sometimes the punishment is lashes. Sometimes the punishment is a fine. Sometimes the punishment is exile, as in moving to a different city, having to live in a city of refuge. So we acknowledge that every act deserves a punishment which is in line with the act that was done, right? But it doesn't mean that even though the punishment could be severe for a severe act, it doesn't mean that the person themselves is evil, even if they're deserving of a death penalty. Even if they've gone so far to deserve the death penalty, they themselves are still not evil. And we've had lots of stories of people that have done terrible acts and yet they have changed their life. Right? There's a famous story of there was a famous thief. And I think there was more than just a thief, but he was a Jewish man by the name of Elazar ben Dodaya. He's known as the most famous Baal Tshuva, that once a local harlot, a prostitute, comes up to him and says, you make all us bad people look good. You're so bad that you make all of us bad people, and for you there's no way of returning. And this was Elazar ben Dodaya. He was a man that did wicked acts. He stole from people, he pillaged, I think he may have even raped somebody, I'm not sure exactly, but he did terrible things. And when he was confronted by another evildoer and said, even compared to me, you're much worse, what happens? The Talmud says that he sat on a hill and he cried bitter tears of remorse, with the final acknowledgement of how far he'd sunken and how bad he was. And he was so depressed and saddened by his state of existence and how far and how low he'd fallen that he died in his sobbing. And a heavenly voice came out and said that he had been accepted into the higher worlds. Why? Because at the end of his life, he was like a different person. He may have for 98% of his life done terrible things, but when he finished his life, he was a different man. He was a man that wanted to have no bad done. And not only that, The evil that he had done had caused him so much pain and suffering that he had actually lost his life. And one of the great rabbis, I think it was Rav or Rebbe, said, Yesh koinai olamai. Some people, it takes the entire life to acquire the world to come. In other words, to show their goodness. They're acting good the entire lives. And then some, Yesh koinai olamai b'shah b'rega chada, in one moment. And Elazar ben Adai was that moment, that one person. Here was an individual that had done terrible things. And only that, he had done terrible things his whole life. Yet that was never a true expression of him. That was never a true expression of who he wanted to be. And yes, he has to be responsible for the acts that he did, and we're not justifying that. And if you were brought to a court case, the court would have to give him the punishment that the Torah says, whether it's lashes or a death penalty or fines or all of them. Every single one of those punishments. But that does not define who the person is. The person does not deserve shame in the sense of that he has to be shamed in his existence as bad. However, there is a concept of shame within Judaism. Shame with the acknowledgement.
It's something what Noah just said earlier.
We said?
Noah just said that just you may be the good person even done said that. Thank you, Noah.
Yeah, good. He says it a lot quicker than I say.
You do more elaborate, but
right.
I think the message was really that's explain more, which is I wasn't clearly understood what he said. Wasn't really clearly coming to me, but explanation give it works better.
Okay, good.
So it's a group teaching or whatever.
That's right.
A group therapy.
We need a bit of group therapy. It's good. Yeah, thank God. I think it always works better when we help each other. That's why I like the comments and the questions. It always comes out better at the end when there's more involvement.
I'll make another comment, which is really, look, you read a lot about Jewish, our religion and everything. And what now you said a few minutes ago, we don't get concept of jail. And you know what now people saying, all this jail things doesn't work. People come in worse, doesn't help people, doesn't do anything. We now this concept bloody 5,000 years ago. Nobody listened to us.
That's true. It's true. And so, okay, it's an interesting topic. Judaism says this, okay? This is, in a nutshell, what Judaism has to say. It's a shiur in and of itself, but it's connected to what we're saying. Judaism says this: a person is essentially a good person that has bad inside of him and has an inclination to want to do bad things at times, but that's not true to that person. Therefore, sometimes people need a reminder to do good. And therefore, certain acts a person needs to have a punishment for. So a person steals from somebody, they have to pay back and sometimes even be forced to pay back double to see the repercussions of their acts. Some acts require the person should be whipped. And in Judaism, in most cases where you would get jail time, you would probably get more like lashes, 39 lashes. Why 39 lashes? The person's got, you did this act, you've done a bad act, so you got to get lashed. You would get lashed for it. You get your lashes, a max of 39. Most people couldn't handle 39, so they got whatever they could handle. And then you went on with your life. You continued, but that was enough to help you hold back from that inclination. But certain acts were so bad that the only way that you could rectify them was your life had to fall into a place that you were, so to speak, the way to rectify your life was through the death penalty. And that's when you had a death penalty. And then we're told in the Talmud, the Rambam Talmud mentions this as well. What happens if you had a person that really deserved the death penalty, but there wasn't enough evidence? He may have killed 5 people, but we never had any witnesses in all 5 cases. Each case, there was only one witness. So we know that he doesn't fit the criteria for a Jewish death penalty. What do you do then? And the Torah says, in that person should be locked up in a jail, and that person's beyond and locked up somewhere until eventually they suffer a terrible death. That's because you can't actually kill them, but they are deserving of the death penalty. So what we're saying is that if anybody does an act or says something which is really wrong, there's a few ways of how to 95% of the time it's an act that you can give a quick punishment and it's over. And that's the way to go about it. If the person's done something so severe that you have to make a statement for the community, and the community has to know how severe this is, we don't want this ever to happen again, yes, there could be a death penalty involved. Okay, so yeah, does jail work in general? No. Look at jail systems. Most people come out. There are some people that come out better, but most people come out worse. Most people, from what I've read, it doesn't generally work because it's not meant for improvement. We believe in rehabilitation, not in incarceration in general, and that's why there should be at times. I suppose it should be appropriate to have. I know this is not such a it's a bit controversial statement to say, but from a Jewish perspective, there is space for a death penalty. But even then, you have to be very careful that you only give the death penalty when you're certain that you have the evidence to truly prove it, and it hasn't been something that somebody framed somebody else, etc. Judaism is very careful about that as well.
I wouldn't like to be a judge.
Sorry? No.
I wouldn't like to be a judge.
Neither would I. And actually, one of the things that Pirkei Avos says is don't run to be a judge and don't run to give judgment. You have to be, it says that you should be slow to judgment and slow to give judgment if you are a judge. And don't run to be a judge unless there's nobody else to do it. Yes, Leon.
I was going to just, on that point, what you just said, there's a rule book for judges too. And they've got, they've got information that specifically tells them what punishments would apply to certain crimes and things like that. A judge, yes, has the power to overrule things, but they still have a guide or a rule book to so that they come up with a reasonable and fair punishment for the crime, sort of thing. But, before, when you're comparing the death penalty, or if someone kills a person, well, once again, if someone kills a person, I can't see, unless they killed that person because they were protecting someone else from being killed, there are certain elements of where you would consider leniency in the case of where you kill a person because it's self-defense or to protect yourself against someone who's forcibly trying to attack you. So there's various rules for various crimes, but in reality, you can't really compare a person killing someone and taking that into account that they're still a good person, because when they've committed the ultimate, based on the circumstances of why they killed someone, if it was to protect themselves from getting killed or something like that where someone attacks them, other than that, I feel that the punishment of the crime deserves the consequences that the court describes. But it's just my general opinion that when we were talking about the death penalty as opposed to in being a good person, I felt that was too much of a you couldn't really compare the situation and still say that person was a good person if it was a nasty crime. That's my logic.
I hear you, and I think that's a problem that a lot of us struggle with. And my answer to that is that intrinsically the person may have fallen to a place where they've lost control of themselves, and therefore perhaps the best punishment for that person is the death penalty, and therefore, in the position that the person finds themselves, they may not be capable of doing much good, and therefore maybe the best act for that person, or the best punishment for that person would be, the best consequence would be for that person to get the death penalty. But I still believe intrinsically that the person is not bad. It doesn't mean that the person doesn't need it, and I think that's important differentiation. People may have lost their capabilities to do good, but intrinsically they still are good.
Do you know? Yeah, you've actually brought to my attention. I've been trying to help someone who has literally stolen thousands of dollars of people through. He's either conned them into giving them money for various reasons, and I got caught myself at one stage too. But he lies so much, yet when you confront him, he's crying his eyes out because he doesn't really want to do it. And he really feels he's got to toughen up somehow and not do the crimes, but he still perpetuates the crimes. He's really remorseful, but he still keeps committing the crimes. He doesn't want to do it, but somehow he does it. Yeah. And, it's a matter of going to the police and dubbing that person in, or to go to the rabbi.
There's some people that have, like, I've read other stories of other people that, and it's difficult to say, like, there's certain people that literally don't want to do certain acts, and they just can't help themselves back. It's beyond their control almost. Yeah.
Maybe
Anyway,
highly not true remorse. It's just maybe it's sort of some spirit of the moment. He feel do something, it was wrong, but it's not true remorse. If you're truly remorseful, you wouldn't do it. That's like story what you tell us, that he died from feeling guilty. That's sort of a thing.
Yeah, that's my opinion too. But he still keeps repeating. This person has been a constant. I'm talking over 30 or 40 years, and even now, he borrows money from people, but I'm yet to see him pay it back. And he doesn't borrow it because he wants to buy something. Spoil himself. He borrows money because he's in a crisis situation. So he borrows money from friends or anybody that he can borrow from, and he wants to pay it back, but then he never does. And it just makes me wonder. I should go to the police and report him and say, look, this is a serial offender. But the point is, he tries, and he's cried to me with real tears, not playing games, but he really, really wanted help. But he's not helping himself, because as soon as he gets over one situation, and he doesn't earn much money, he's a pensioner. So as soon as he gets into a crisis situation, he somehow manages to talk someone, or he cons someone to lending him some money to pay whatever bill, or whether it be a medical bill or whatever, in a sense, life-threatening too, but he never pays it back. And I just, this guy deserves to be put in jail and the key thrown away, but he's still out. And if he went to court, the court would look on him more leniently, because he really, really displays
remorse.
the fact that he's really sorry. Remorse, that's the word.
Yeah, I hear you. It's a very difficult situation, those type of situations. And I think it's sometimes, unfortunately, some people find themselves in those situations. It's a very difficult how to answer that type of question, but I do believe that sometimes people put up an act, and some people honestly can't help themselves. They want to help themselves, but they can't. Anyway, I want to just put one last point, share one last point with you. It's something I wanted to do a bit earlier in the shir, which is what got me into the shir to start off with. You see, in the very beginning of the Shulchan Aruch, of the whole of Shulchan Aruch, and this is a book called Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. It's a shortened version of the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is the code of Jewish law that we follow. And this is a shortened version. So I wanted to show you a few things. The first thing is, it tells us this. Shavisi Hashem Lenegdi Summit. It's a great thing to learn, but we'd run out of time. I thought I was going to spend most of the year on this, but anyway, it's type of my thing to do, get carried away on the side points. But it says over here, I have set Hashem before me always. This is a fundamental rule of the Torah and of the attributes of the righteous who walk before Hashem. So the first point that I want to tell us is that we should remember that God is always watching us. Now, there's two things that it can make us feel. The first thing is, if you know that God's always watching you, you could say, oh, I could feel safe, I could feel loved, I could feel observed and secure. And that's a big part of it. The other part is that he's saying is that when you acknowledge that Hashem is there, you behave differently. When other people are around, generally, we behave differently. So when we look and acknowledge that God is always watching us, we're going to think. And while that causes us to be ashamed, and that's where the thing, he says, I skipped a whole bunch of lines over here, but bearing this in mind, it is certain that you will immediately acquire a feeling of reverence and submissiveness for the awesomeness of Hashem, blessed be He, and be ashamed to sin before Him. Sometimes shame has a place in Judaism, and that is shame of your behavior. If it could prevent you from doing something wrong and acknowledging that it does harm yourself and harms your community, then there's space for it. Okay, I wanted to go into this a bit further, but that's the one point. Always to acknowledge that God is watching over us every single moment, which means two things. He's protecting us, He's caring for us, He's looking after us, He knows what's going on. And the other thing is, it also means that He's watching us and we should behave ourselves, we should be respectful. Now, another thing that I wanted to point out is this, the third law in all of Jewish Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. It says, Yehuda ben Taimeh, he was one of the rabbis from the Talmud, he says, be bold as a leopard, light as an eagle, swift as a deer, strong as a lion, to do the will of your Father in heaven. This is from Ethics of Our Fathers, chapter 5 as well. Now, he goes on to say, bold as a leopard means you should not be ashamed before people who mock you for worshiping Hashem. Right at the beginning of the Code of Jewish law, and the Rebbe used to say this often, one of the first laws in Judaism is don't allow people to mock you or shame you. Don't be affected by other people laughing at you. You know, this is something that has made Jewish people proud to stick out throughout the generations. Yeah, in a culture of shame, everybody wants to fit in. Everyone wants to be the same and just wants to be part of the community and only stick out and be famous for good things. Nobody wants to look different. In Judaism, a fundamental principle is, it says, we say this to everyone,
Yes, please.
Don't be embarrassed from those the scoffers, right? This is such a fundamental principle because this really affects us. When we feel like when we're walking in the street and I look Jewish and I look wearing a kippah or whatever it is, and I can feel a little bit different and I feel uncomfortable because of it. That's actually a sign of Jewishness, that we should never be ashamed of who we are. On the opposite, we should be proud. Obviously, if it's in a dangerous place where if they see Jewish people, it could cause harm to them, that's one thing. Sometimes that harm is just in our mind, but sometimes it's real. And sometimes if you're going in a dangerous country or going in the middle of Palestinian territory, in the middle of Gaza Strip, I would recommend that you don't dress like a Jew. Probably try to fit in as best as possible. But if you're going in another place where just people, you don't think people don't like Jews, or you're not so comfortable, then don't be embarrassed by who you are. Don't be embarrassed to wear your kippah. Don't be embarrassed to tell people that you're Jewish. Be proud of who you are. And yeah, people may laugh at it. But don't allow what other people say and what other people do to affect the way you define yourself. Because ultimately, Judaism is about an intrinsic worth and goodness that we know that we are. And by allowing ourselves to become embarrassed by the way other people laugh at us and look at us, that destroys Judaism, because Judaism is ultimately not that shame type of culture. It's a intrinsically worthy culture of good people. I'll finish off with one last story. And then if anybody wants to say last comments, you're welcome to. Rabbi Abraham Twersky, who was one of the great rabbis, lecturers, writers of the past generation. He also passed away during the COVID era, unfortunately, about a year ago. Rabbi Abraham Twersky wrote many books. Anyway, he tells a story about how he once gets onto a plane. He had a white small beard, and he would usually wear like a long coat, I think. He once gets onto a plane, and this woman that he sits next to starts cursing him in Yiddish and says, you religious Jews, you ancient, making us, all the Jews look bad, and because of you, we suffer, because you guys always have to stick out and you always have to be different. Why can't you be like the rest of everybody? And he turns to the lady and he says, I'm sorry, lady. Could you talk, and are you talking in English? And she's like, sorry. He's like, I'm sorry, but I am Amish. He says, so I am an Amish Christian, and you seem to be talking another language. And she's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I thought something else. I was talking Yiddish to you. Oh, you should know, I respect you people. I think so highly of the Amish people that you've kept your tradition and your garb. And he's like, is something about the way I'm dressed? You don't like it? And it's like, no. It's wonderful. It's wonderful that you've kept up your traditions and your ways. And then he says back in Yiddish, when I'm a Jew, then suddenly I'm terrible. But when I'm an Amish, then I'm okay. Right? He caught the lady. He caught the lady right there. But the idea is that sometimes when it's our own, we feel like we have to be the most, they say to walk down the street and you see a Jew, you say, excuse me, are you Jewish? If the person says, no, but I wish I was, or oh no, I'm Christian, or I'm this, or I'm that, but if the person's like, leave me alone, why are you bothering me? Then you know the person's Jewish, right? Because sometimes our Jewishness is something that we're ashamed of, or we don't know why. But the only person that tried to really change it was Hitler. Hitler said the Jewish people brought consciousness to the world. And that's goodness. And he acknowledged that. And we're going to take away that consciousness. We'll take away that guilt of what's right, what's wrong, and what it means to be a Jew. And that's something we shouldn't be ashamed of. We should be proud of. So in my initial question, should we have guilt or shame? There's space for guilt, there's space for shame, but most of the time shame is a destructive thing, most of the time, unless it's the shame in front of God, which ultimately should cause a guilt that we want to be a better people. But guilt should not destroy us. It should lift us up by telling us that we're much better than that. And not that we're guilty and we're bad because we've done something wrong. No, that's not healthy. But that, yes, certain acts are not appropriate for us, but we are much better than that. And that ultimately lifts us up and doesn't destroy us. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining. That's the.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shkoyach. It's
Oh
good.
yeah. Thank you, Sam.
I think I just want to make a quick distinction. I think if it's self-guilt or self-shame, to an extent it's good, because it stops you from doing things you shouldn't be doing. But when you're shaming others, when you're putting that guilt on others, then it's a bad thing. So there might be a distinction between your inwards directed shame or guilt and outwards directed shame or guilt.
So I agree with that. But I'll put another sub to that, and that is that even with your own guilt and shame, just also tell yourself that it's not you. The Rebbe used to say a person could have done Satan show the one night, and the next day they think, "Whom I to go and daven? Who am I to put on tefillin when yesterday I did this and that and that?" You know, for some person it might be eating pork, and the other person it might be having had a relationship with a non-Jewish person. Another person it might have been, I don't know, missed davening Ma'ariv, or not said Shema before they went to bed. Each person on their level, and then the next morning they wake up and they feel, "Who am I to go and pray and have intention?" The Rebbe said, you should wake up the next day and say, "Yes, you did something wrong," and you'll find a time to rectify that. But today, it's a new day. You're a new person. Give it all you got, and don't dwell on the past, in a sense. In other words, so what I'm saying is, yes, there is space for shame and guilt for self, but at special times, not most of the time. And even then, don't let it bring you down, right? Don't let that guilt and that shame make you think any lower of yourself. Think actually higher of yourself, and don't let it bring you down, because you're just a person.
Ultimately. Beautiful. Thank you very much. Excellent show. Thank you again.
Thank you.
I agree.
Thank
All
you.
the best. Thank
Thank
you
you for
very much,
joining.
Rabbi.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sam.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Noah. Have a good night.
Bye, man.